piece of this is going to be actually building the chat application. So this is where we put our front end on. This is where we deal with the web framework. And this is where Chainlit comes in. We like Chainlit, as we've talked about. It's got a really, really nice interface. It allows us to ask questions, to look at chains, to look at when we start adding RAG to it, we can look at specific where we got reference materials. We can change prompts, look at prompts, play around with them. This is that prompt playground. We can look through the thinking, the chain of thought reasoning, and it integrates very, very well with any sort of infrastructure tool stack that we might pick up. So Chainlit's great. And it's got a very simple Python syntax. It's really, really straightforward for, you know, people that are familiar with web frameworks already. And it's pretty easy to pick up for folks that aren't. There's no way, the only way out is through with web frameworks, really. So we're going to have a couple additional things to do here, like starting the chat. And then when we get a message, what do we do? So you'll notice some of these aspects within the code. And you'll need to sort of connect some pieces here. You guys will need to set up your OpenAI API key, just like you had to sort of sign up for ChatGPT Plus. You'll need an OpenAI API key to be able to build applications with OpenAI's API. And so this sort of making sure you have access to things is going to be a key component of really developing any application moving forward in your career. So when it comes to building, that's sort of putting the application front end over top of the OpenAI API to allow us to interact with it the same way as ChatGPT. When we talk about sharing this bad boy, we want a public URL that we can share with our friends. We can text it to our mom, our sister, our son, right? We can text it to anybody we want and be like, check out this sweet AI app that I built, right? This is going to be that big wow moment for you guys. This is where Hugging Face Spaces comes in. And creating your own space is very, very easy, as Chris will show. We're going to use the approach of the Docker container, and you'll see it actually builds the Docker container for us. It's freaking awesome. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass it right over to Wiz. We want to maximize the time that you guys have to work together today to show you the step-by-step walkthrough of how to put Chainlit onto that OpenAI API, wrap that bad boy up in a container, and then ship it and share it with Hugging Face. Wiz, show them a little bit about how to do all of this, and let's go ahead and focus a little bit on the Chainlit piece that we know people are going to continue struggling with. The last thing I'll say is you guys have to sort of do this same thing over and over and over again in this course. The code behind the scenes isn't the code anyone cares about. It's the code people interact with. It's the app people interact with, and this is what gets you there. This is going to be a game changer for you if you learn it in, out, up, and down. So with that, Wiz, over to you, man.
Hey, thanks, Greg. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we're first just going to jump into VS Code because, well, that's where the code lives. Got to go where the code lives. So here we are in VS Code. You'll notice that we have our AI Engineering repository on the left-hand side here, and we can go to day 2 in week 1, and we can see that there's a bunch of different files. There are only a few files we truly care about here. The first is the app.py, which is where the Chainlit application lives. We have a Chainlit MD, which is like a README, but for Chainlit. And we have, of course, our Dockerfile, which is how we create our container. And the container is basically the best thing. And then the last piece is, just kind of standard repo stuff. So let's look at the app.py and let's kind of talk about what's happening in Chainlit here. So number one, we just got a pile of imports. Classic top of every application in Python is just a a massive set of imports. Our load.env is useful if we're going to be running this file locally, and we've populated our .env. You'll notice that this is just a .env sample, so you'd have to copy this file, and then you'd have to paste the file, and then we want to rename it, right, to our just .env, and then we can put our OpenAI key, and that's going to load it, and that's going to be great. But for now, we're just going to, not worry about that so much. The next up is we have our system template, our user template. These are basically just, pieces of or strings that we can format later on. It looks like we got a question from Rajesh that I'll try to answer quickly as we go through.
Yeah, so quick question, Chris. So if we I mean, so what does Chainlit give you compared to, let's say, just doing it completely manually with talking to the OpenAI API?
Yeah, we'll talk about it as we go through. So
Okay.
I'll keep that question in mind, but we'll discuss that as we kind of go through.
Okay.
So we have our user template. User template is exactly what we had before in our Colab notebook. And that is all that's doing is it's, telling us, it's basically just adding the chain of thought step, to be honest with you. But the idea is that we have some user input and then we tack on that chain of thought so that we get a well thought out answer. And then we get to some first chainlet. Now, if you're not familiar with Python decorators, this is going to be a crash course that we're going to talk about very, 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 very quickly. Please come to office hours if you have more questions. The idea is a decorator is like a function that takes another function, right? And it's going to do stuff, and it's going to use that other function in some way, right? Like this whole async def start chat, this is a function that's going to be wrapped by all this. Now, the way that Chainlit works is you can think of, there's a number of different steps that Chainlit's going to go through every time we use this application. And at different points or different steps along the way, we can kind of inject our own information, right? So we can say this on-chain start decorator is going to add this extra information when the chat is starting up, and it's going to be able to leverage that to do some things that we desire. But the idea here is all this decorator is basically just saying, hey, whatever function follows this, I'm going to use that for my behavior. It's a little bit cleaner to see with on message. Basically, this is going to say, on message, whenever we get a message, we're going to do all this stuff that's in this function, right? And that's it. That's all we do. The basics of this are, we're going to get a message, and that's going to be a message. And I know it's so, the terminology is all the same word over and over again, but the idea is the message is a chainlit message, which is a particular object, right? And all we're going to do is stuff, and then we're going to return something. And the thing that we return is going to eventually be what the response is, right? That's it. So now we do stuff, which is a lot, but it's not too crazy, right? It's in fact exactly what we saw before in the notebook. We have a client, and we use that client to interact with OpenAI. Now we're using this asynchronous client instead of just the client. If you have questions about what async means, please come to office hours. I'm not going to spend time talking about it now, but it's a way that we can make sure we keep things responsive and we're not waiting around for things to finish before we start doing other work. And then this is just going to print it to our terminal so we can see it. Totally unnecessary step, but it's good to look at. And then inside, again, this is going to happen every time the user sends us a message. Right? Every time they send us a message, all this stuff is going to happen in the background. So we open up our client, and then we're going to create a prompt object. Now, the prompt object is all this is doing is it's letting Chainlit see more about this prompt so it can populate more information in its front end for us, right? That's it. It's just like we're going to package this in a certain way so that Chainlit knows how to properly display it and knows how to let us know what's happening. Then all we're going to do is we're going to build an empty message that will eventually send back to the front end. This is what the user is going to see, right? And then we just straight up call the OpenAI async endpoint. We're going to use a lot of Python code. Basically, all this Python code is saying is, hey, for each, for our input, which is going to be exactly what we have here, send that input to OpenAI in the way it expects, which is in a list of different objects that have a role and some content. We're going to send all of those, and we're going to expect a streamed response. So you might notice that, whenever you're talking to like ChatGPT, you're going to get like, it gives you word by word, token by token, right? Is all this streaming thing is doing is it's making sure that we just get like a bunch of tokens in a row, as opposed to needing to wait for it to generate every token, right? And then send the full block of text. Because you can imagine, right? If you're using ChatGPT and it responds in a very long message, if you had to just sit there waiting for all that text to be generated and then it showed up, it would not feel nearly as good as it would if it started showing you the tokens right away, right? Oftentimes they're even generating faster than you can read, so it's all good. But that's all this code does. So basically, all it's saying is every time we get a message, that's all this on message does, right? Every time we get a message, we're gonna get our OpenAI client. We're gonna send our user's input to the OpenAI client, and we're going to get a stream of tokens as a response. And every time we get a token from the OpenAI endpoint, we're going to send it to the user so they can see it in that Chainlit UI. That's all it's happening, right? Like it is a lot, but that's all that it's doing. We get the message from the user. We send that message along with some formatting that we're doing to create those roles and to add that chain of thought prompt, right? And then we get a stream of tokens in response. And every time we get a token from OpenAI, we just send that right back to the user so that they can get those tokens as well. That's it. These decorators, you can think of it as like interrupting the normal flow, right? If we didn't have these, it would just do its own thing. But instead, we're going to tell them, hey, this is, instead of doing what you would normally do what I want you to do, right? Which is in this case, do this, accept the user's prompt, generate tokens, send to user. Streaming tokens as they're generated. No, very, very specifically, Matul, the streaming is as the tokens are generated. We don't have to wait for every token to be generated, which makes it feel very snappy. So that's that, and that's great. And it's cool, and we love it. And it works locally, right? And you can wrap it up in this Docker file. The Docker file I'm not going to go too deep into right now. We can talk about this a lot more throughout our time together. But all this is doing, in essence, is it's saying, hey, we want a specific place or a specific environment to run our application, and we need a blueprint, right? We need instructions on how to build that environment. And you can think of that Docker file as a blueprint for your container, right? We're going to say, hey, start with the Python 3.9 foundation. And then we're going to add some user group stuff on top of that because Hugging Face requires it. And once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and if you could just take the requirements.txt I've given you and put it into this folder inside the container. And then inside the container, if you could go ahead and run this command, which is going to install all of those requirements, right? Then copy the rest of the stuff I gave to you, and then go ahead and you're going to run this command inside that container. This is all it's doing, right? It's a blueprint. And that blueprint is in a standard format so that when we send it to a container or we send it to a machine in AWS that has Docker or GCP that has, wherever has Docker, it knows how to read this blueprint and it's going to be able to create that container for us. That's all the Docker file is doing. It's just a glorified blueprint. It might seem confusing when you first start using it, but as you get more reps, you're gonna be able to really get a firm grasp of like it's just a list of instructions, just like any other kind of algorithm. Just a list you follow from top to bottom that tells whatever's building that container how to do so. So that's Chainlit in code. Looks dope. Now we want to be able to push this thing to the hub, right? So in the instructions, you're going to find that we're going to wind up with this local directory called Beyond ChatGPT. So if I'm just going to go ahead and open my terminal so we can get the terminal view here, right? And if we go to beyond ChatGPT, right, what we're going to do, instead of kind of fiddling with files and all this other stuff, which is like, you know, it's kind of, maybe it's not so fun, you know, it's hard to keep track of. What we're going to do instead is we're going to do something where we add our Hugging Face space as a remote, and we just push this pile of files to Hugging Face, right? And the way that we add the remote is just with get remote add, and then you name it. So we're going to name it HF repo. And then you provide the address. Hugging Face gives it to you, and I'll show you an example of this in just a second. But the idea is very straightforwardly, we add it as a remote. We're going to make sure everything's up to speed by using a command that you'll find in the repo. So I'm not going to go through showing it to you now, but you can just copy and paste it in. Basically, we just want to make sure that the Hugging Face remote server is synced up to ours. And then you can just push those files to Hugging Face, right? And that's all you have to do. We have this local environment, and then we push all of those files, including our Docker file, including our requirements.txt, including our Chainlit application. We push those to our remote server, which is our repository on Hugging Face, and it's going to know what to do from there. So I'm gonna swap over my screen for a second so we can see the Hugging Face side. And here we go. I'm going to go ahead and change this to here. Perfect. Okay. So this is what the Chainlit application looks like once we're done. I'll just show you an example of how it works. How can I assist you today? You know, how do I make really good lasagna, my dude? Right? We can send that message, and that message is going to, you'll notice it's all these tokens are coming in a big stream, right? You don't have to wait for that to finish, and then we get one big chunk of text. Instead, we get rapid fire tokens, right? Feels very responsive. Thanks, Chainlit. And this is the idea. That's all we're doing, right? If we look at the files that we have on this Hugging Face repository, you'll see, right? They're one-to-one match with what we were just looking at. We have our Docker file, our README, or app.py, our chainlit.md, and our requirements.txt. That's it, right? And it can use this blueprint of the Docker file in order to build that container and run our application, which we have here. That's the basic idea. All you have to do basically is push this to Hugging Face, but where do you push it is a great question. And so what we'll do really quickly is we'll just look at how we would do that. So when we are in our, when we're on our profile, right? So I'll go to my profile. So it's exactly the same as what you'll see, right? And what we want to do is we want to create a new space. So we're going to go to our Hugging Face spaces, which is a new space here. Click the button. We're going to name it whatever we want, like, you know, first LLM, let's go. And then I don't think we can have an exclamation mark. We'll set a license. It's up to you what you want to do. This code's MIT, so you can do whatever you want. We click Docker. It's blank because we're bringing our own Docker file. Everything else is the same. We hit create space, and that's where we get this link. And this link is what we can use to add this space as a remote server to our Git repo that we'll then push to. Again, this is all spelled out in the instructions, but we just want to see it. And once you've pushed it, it's hands off. The only thing you have left to do is to go to the settings, which you can access through the kebab menu, and add your secret, right? We need a secret. So we'll have new secret. It's got to be your OpenAI API key, right? This is it. And then you paste it on in. The only tip I'll give you here is definitely make sure there's no extra new line characters or spaces. It will complain at you and it won't work. So make sure it's just the string. That's the key. Once you've done that, you'll be able to access your Chainlit application just as though you were running it locally on Docker. And that's it. That's the whole process. Obviously, this was a bit quick, guys. We're going to spend more time talking about Chainlit as we progress forward, and we'll spend more time talking about some ins and outs of Hugging Face. But for right now, the idea is once we have it on our machine, we just need to put it into our Hugging Face space, and we'll be able to enjoy it. And our Chainlit application is just regular Python with some extra widgets, which is those decorators. just essentially let us interrupt the normal behavior of the Chainlit application. And that's it, right? Again, just 15 or 16 simple steps and you're away.